Pokémon FireRed and LeafGreen's Kanto region is probably the region I have gone through the most amount of times. The game's world strikes such a strong balance of being simple and basic, but also being engaging and fun. While Pokémon FireRed and LeafGreen are the remakes of the original Pokémon games for the Game Boy, and Kanto was even revisited again for Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I will always consider the FireRed and LeafGreen Kanto to be the definitive interpretation of the region because, well, it was the one I played when I was 10. But it seems with Pokémon FireRed and LeafGreen coming to the Nintendo Switch, a whole new generation will be experiencing this Game Boy Advance classic for the first time. And that has made me want to revisit it as well. Let's take a look at 101 locations across the Kanto region and Sevy Islands and examine how their presentation and gameplay elements lead to an unforgettable game experience. At the very start of the game, you see yourself in front of a TV playing video games. How relatable. The console in the player's room is an SNES, which is the same as it was in the original Generation 1 game. Odd how they didn't update it to be a GameCube, considering that Hoenn has GameCubes and all the Gen 4 games, including its remakes, showcase the Wii. Other than a cheeky little bit of advertising for the home consoles, the player starting off in front of a game console immediately lets us relate to them and see ourselves as them. I mean, we're playing a video game, they're playing a video game, we're one and the same. I know that sounds insignificant, but this actually made you feel a lot more connected to the character than you may think. The other notable spot in the player's room is the PC, which allows you to connect to your item storage where a free potion is waiting for you. Something unique about this PC is that it only accesses the item storage, not the Pokemon storage. I'm not sure if this would ever have any utility elsewhere in the game. Like, let me know if there was ever a time where you really needed to store or withdraw an item from the item storage and you used this PC specifically. And of course, since Pallet Town is the only town without a Pokemon Center, your mother will heal your team if you talk to her. If you talk to the mother at the beginning of the game, she says that everyone leaves home someday, which communicates to the player that the adventure is already starting to the point where even your own mother has accepted it. The rival's house, show of hands, who actually went inside the other Pallet Town house? Nobody? Okay. The rival's house serves a minor purpose, which is to have the rival's sister give the player the town map. It's funny how most games make sure you get the town map by progressing in the story, but here it's an optional key item. I never really had much use for the town map, so I often just walk right by here. The Pokemon Lab is the place where you get your starter Pokemon. Pallet Town is established to be this sort of small town place, so the existence of the lab with all the little professor people over here and the machines and bookcases gives the location a feeling of a humble place of research. So I'm not going to have any regular old route beyond this list, but I have to acknowledge Route 1, the real start of the player's journey. Route 1 has no trainers, but a couple of moments where you have to pass through grass where you will most likely run into one of the two encounters of the route, Pidgey and Rattata. On your first visit to Route 1, you won't have any Pokeballs, so the encounters you will get are nothing more than a simple way to introduce the concept of fleeable wild battles to the player. The Pokemon Trainer School is a recurring location across the Pokemon franchise that appears in certain early towns. For an experienced player like myself, I haven't really set foot in the Trainer School in a while, but I noticed that FireRed's Trainer School doesn't really have all that much going for it. Sure, there's a little bit of info in this book here, but all the blackboard does is teach you about status conditions, which I suppose is at least a little bit important considering you're likely to find yourself poisoned in Viridian Forest. But does the player really need to learn about the freeze status condition this early in the game? It's not even going to be possible for a Pokemon to get frozen for quite some time. The reason the Trainer School is so small in FireRed and LeafGreen is that there are so many other elements of the remakes that want to teach you about the game, with the Teachy TV key item, and even the fact that you can at any time press L and R to pull up a menu with some little tips on the game. FireRed and LeafGreen really does sell itself as the most basic of all Pokemon games, and a great way for a beginner to learn about the franchise. And it's cool to see that with it coming to the Switch, it will reach a whole new generation. The Viridian City Pokemart is unique because it's the only Pokemart in the entire game that you are required to go into in order to progress. The clerk gives you Oak's parcel to deliver to Professor Oak in order to get the Pokedex. I used to think when I was a kid that Oak's parcel actually had the Pokedex in it, but upon paying closer attention to some of the dialogue, Oak says that it was a custom-ordered Pokeball, which I'm disappointed that we don't get to see. I wonder what kind of Pokeball it was. A spot that always caught my eye in Viridian City is this area behind a cut tree in a lake where this guy is just hanging out. I usually usually forget that this guy is here when I get cut or surf later in the game and often don't visit him. But if you do visit him, he's actually the move tutor for Dream Eater. It's kind of an obscure move, not too many Pokemon can learn it, but you could get yourself a Drowsy with a Hypnosis Dream Eater combination before even the 3rd badge if you utilize this guy's services. If you decide to go west instead of north from Viridian City, you'll find yourself at the gate to the Pokemon League, where you can't go any farther because you haven't gotten any badges yet. This area helps introduce you to the concept of gym badges and establishes the main goal of the game. Viridian Forest is the first moment of the game that I really do feel like I'm on an adventure. Before, we've been walking through regular towns and dirt roads, but a dark forest is the kind of place that you don't really go every day. And that's really the essence of what Pokemon wants to make you feel like as a player, like you are on an adventure. Depending on where we live, most of us have seen lots of foresty areas and know that it's not exactly the most safe place to just venture off. So they give us a sense of the unknown. By having this early location in Kanto be based on such a place, it gives us a sense of adventure. Another thing I like about Viridian Forest is how you can kind of get lost in it, but not too lost, you know? If you happen to go west instead of east, you get stuck going in a little circle with a few items as a reward. These little dead ends and the multiple different paths give Viridian Forest a sense of sprawlingness, even though, if you know exactly where you're going, it's a relatively small area. Viridian Forest also introduces bug-type Pokemon to the player with Caterpie and Weedle. These Pokemon also help teach the player about evolution, because they evolve into their final form quite quickly. It will also punish the player if they decide to capture the evolved form instead of the base form, since Metapod and Kakuna only know Harden if caught in the wild. Because of this, I was always encouraged to raise up my Pokemon from their base form, even though with most other Pokemon you don't actually get much of a penalty for it. And of course, Viridian Forest is the home of Pikachu, the first rare encounter of the game with a 5% chance to find. If you're on a first playthrough and get lost in the woods, you're likely to probably run into at least one Pikachu. What makes Pikachu an interesting encounter is that it's an Electric-type, and you won't have a chance to get another Electric-type Pokemon for quite some time. The Repel Garden in Pewter City is this little flowery area where there's a guy walking around, and if you talk to him, he asks you if you know what he's doing. Funnily enough, you have to say no in order to get him to explain himself. He'll just be like, heh, yeah, you know, if you say yes. This character is meant to teach the player about the concept of the Repel item. By saying that this character is using it to keep Pokemon out of his garden, it communicates to you that you can use it to keep Pokemon away from you, which, if you just got lost in Viridian Forest and got poisoned by a bunch of wild Weedles, is welcome news. Pewter City is also home to a museum. While the museum charges you a small admission fee to get in, it doesn't provide any specific gameplay purpose, although it does add quite a lot to the world building. The museum introduces the concept of fossilized prehistoric Pokemon to the player, and also includes a section that focuses on space travel. Both of these elements of the museum set up your eventual trip to Mount Moon. There's also, if you come back after getting cut, a back room to the museum where you can get a hold of the old Amber, which will give you Aerodactyl later in the game. So I wouldn't usually put any old Pokemon Center on this list, but this one is interesting because it's a rare instance of a Pokemon Center being located on a route rather than in a town. The Mount Moon Pokemon Center, beyond being strangely placed, also introduces the player to the concept of Team Rocket. There's a guy with a piece of paper on the table in this Pokemon Center that seems out of place compared to others, so you feel more compelled to talk to this NPC, who will then discuss how Team Rocket, who you are about to meet in Mount Moon, have been causing some trouble. This is also the Pokemon Center where the guy sells you a Magikarp for 500 Pokédollars. One of the few instances in the entire franchise where you can directly exchange in-game money for a Pokemon. It's funny how the game kind of communicates that this is some sort of scam, but this is actually an incredible deal, since 500 Pokédollars is not a lot of money at all. For reference, it's the cost of 2.5 Pokeballs, and Magikarp wouldn't be able to be captured until well after the second gym. So by getting Magikarp here, you have much more early game opportunity to switch train it and have it evolve into Gyarados, one of the most powerful Pokemon in the entire game, much faster. So remember how I said Viridian Forest made us feel like we were on an adventure because we were going to a place we usually wouldn't go in real life? Mount Moon takes that to an even bigger extreme by having us journey through another off-limits place. A cave. This cave location represents a major jump in your Pokemon journey and access to a wider variety of different Pokemon, with Rock-type Geodude, the Poison Flying-type Zubat, and the Grass Bug Paris. If you're not feeling too interested in new types, you can go for the rarer encounter of Mount Moon, Clefairy. I'd recommend if you're hunting for Clefairy to do so on the bottom floor of Mount Moon, because on the top floor they only appear 1% of the time, as opposed to 6% on the bottom floor. From a design standpoint, the developers probably did this to make Clefairy feel rarer. If someone went through without any repel, since the bottom floor is smaller than the top, the player would be a lot less likely to find Clefairy. So in finding one by accident, it would feel more special and encourage players trading with one another. However, if you know the encounter rates, you can just walk around a little bit on the bottom floor until one shows up. Mount Moon also does a good job of having a bunch of different dead ends that really make you feel like you're lost in a cave. The game encourages you to take these ladders downward, which both lead to a dead end with a Team Rocket fight and an item reward. Once you move past those dead ends and get to the bottom floor, you have to fight a few more Team Rocket grunts. The final scripted fight of Mount Moon is actually not a rocket grunt, but this guy who is trying to hoard some fossils for himself. I always used to think that this dude was with Team Rocket and that he had something to do with them, but nope, it's just a random dude who is really into fossils. Once you beat him, you get a chance to choose between the Helix and Dome fossil. To a player who doesn't really know what that means, they'll probably just pick which of those words sounds more interesting to them, and they end up with whatever fossil Pokemon they end up with. After Mount Moon, you'll come up on these two fight guys standing in front of each other. Some players may walk right by them, assuming they are extra trainer battles, and since they just went through Mount Moon, they probably aren't fully healed. But if you do talk to them, you'll find that they teach the attacks Mega Punch and Mega Kick. These attacks are super obscure, despite how basic they are. Mega Punch is just like a basic normal type attack that does a bit more damage than Tackle, and Mega Kick is a stronger normal type attack at the cost of not being super accurate. Back in Gen 1, these attacks were TM moves that could be learned by a whole heap of Pokemon. But in terms of actual level up learners, there are very few Pokemon that actually get these moves. So the only way to have most Pokemon learn these attacks is through these guys. These moves eventually just kind of faded into obscurity as the game moved on to more interesting attacks. But I'm always reminded of these basic Gen 1 attacks every time I pass by these two dudes. Something else interesting about the route after Mount Moon is how it doesn't allow you to go back to Mount Moon due to the jump ledges. I think that design-wise, this was done in order to help guide the player forward rather than backward. An inexperienced player could find themselves going all the way back through Mount Moon and then having to go through Mount Moon again, which could be very frustrating to an early game player with little in-game money for that many repels. So by having the game trap you in Cerulean City with no going back, you have no choice but to move forward. The bike shop is a place where you can look at a 1 million Pokédollar bike. For reference, a literal nugget of gold is worth 5,000 Pokédollars in this universe. Must be a real nice bike. Of course, there's no way to buy this bike even if you have max money because, well, max money is 999,999 Pokédollars. The point of this $1 million price tag is to encourage the player to come back later when they have some sort of way of getting the bike. This house is home to a guy who explains what each badge in the game does. If you're playing for the first time, it's a good way to familiarize yourself with how many badges there are and what they do. The badge guy's house also has this little backyard with a view of the river and Nugget Bridge. Its only gameplay purpose is a hidden rare candy, but vibes-wise, I love this little backyard as it opens up the world a little more and makes you think of what it would be like to live in a cozy place like this. The next house over is home to the berry powder guy who gives you the berry powder jar. What does the berry powder jar do, you may ask? Well, this is a pretty obscure Gen 3 mechanic because it required multiplayer connectivity for something that wasn't really all that useful. I'm sure plenty of us have memories of battling or trading with our friends through a link cable, but not many of us were lining up to play the berry powder minigame. How is this game played? It's a button masher. That's it. You just press A. Get your friends together, link up, and mash A. Literally the worst form of gameplay ever put to screen. You get points depending on what berry you used, how well you did in the game, and how many players were playing with you. The prizes for this minigame are the herb shop healing items, which you can't actually get through any other means in FireRed and LeafGreen. But while these items are useful, they are not worth going through all this trouble just to get them. The higher prizes are the EV boosting items, which while they can be useful, you can just buy them in the department store, so grinding money is probably easier than this berry crushing nonsense. But the big prize here is the PP up, where this is probably the easiest and fastest way to get repeat PP ups. You just need to know 4 other human beings who are actually interested in playing this shallow minigame. Needless to say that the berry powder is absolutely a product of its time, an attempt to push multiplayer interaction in a way that the game absolutely did not need, and it failed miserably. Nugget Bridge is a place where you fight 5 trainers in a row to win a gold nugget. It's a part of the game where the trainer battles really start to ramp up, and at the end of Nugget Bridge you get a surprise Team Rocket fight, which you may end up going into unhealed if you weren't ready for it. The most prominent feature of Bill's house is this big teleportation machine where you have Bill, who accidentally turned himself into a Clefairy, get turned back into a human. This insane leap in the science fiction world building of the series is never brought up again at all. I always found Bill to be kind of a strange character. Like, they obviously wanted him to be a big deal with him inventing the Pokemon storage system and this turn you into a Pokemon machine, but it never felt like he had too much of an impact on the game overall. Bill also gives you a ticket to the SSN, which gives the player another destination to go to. After Bill's house, there's this little path that takes you all the way back to Cerulean City, so if you carefully avoided any trainers on the path to Bill's, you won't end up in an unexpected fight now that you've been given another destination. The path back always felt so scenic, and it really ties this little journey through Nugget Bridge together quite nicely. The broken into house was robbed by Team Rocket for the Dig TM. The Rocket Grunt responsible for this does what any reasonable criminal would do in this situation: stand literally 2 steps away from the crime scene. Once you defeat the Team Rocket Grunt, he gives you the Dig TM, which you can then just kind of keep. I know the guy says you can keep it if you talk to him, but you also don't have to talk to him. So for many players, they just stopped a robbery only to keep the stolen goods for themselves. It's also funny that these people never clean their house throughout the whole game, so it just remains permanently ransacked, and that going through these people's destroyed house is one of the only ways to leave the city. Like, do people who commute to work from Cerulean to Saffron City just like walk through these people's house every morning? The Kanto Pokemon Daycare is unique in the sense that it's the only daycare that only takes one Pokemon at a time, so you aren't able to utilize any Pokemon breeding. All the daycare does is that if you leave a Pokemon with them, they level up 1 experience point per step the player takes. Sometimes I take a Pokemon that just didn't make the team and pop it in here so it'll level up throughout the journey, but 1 step per EXP point is much lower leveling than you would get from fighting, so you'd be lucky to gain even 20 more levels by the time you beat the entire game. The daycare is also the only way at this point in the game to actually get rid of HM moves. But the only way to do that is to have the HM move be in the move slot of the move that would be replaced with the Pokemon's next level up move. Yeah, getting rid of HM moves at this point in the game is a nightmare. Since the path to Saffron City is closed off, the player has to take the underground path to skip over Saffron City to get to Vermilion City. It's kind of a clever way of closing off the world now to keep the game linear and then opening it up later. The underground path has the opportunity to make an in-game trade of whichever is the more common Nidoran of your game with a Nidoran that is less common in your game. It's nice that they use this more inconsequential area to give the player that in-game trade chance. The underground path also does have hidden items that will even respawn after some time has passed, but they're just like potions and antidotes. In Vermilion City, there's a guy with a mat shop who says he's building something, and he never does. Not even when the Johto protagonist goes here 3 years later. What a big load of nothing this guy is. The Pokemon Fan Club is a place where people talk about how much they like Pokemon, especially this guy who is so appreciative about you letting him yap about his Rapidash that he gives you a ticket that allows you to get a 1 million Pokédollar bike for free. The man says he doesn't need the bike himself because he can fly around on his Fearow, introducing to the player the idea that you can use a Pokemon to fly around later in the game. The SSN is an area that the player can clear with only 1 battle against the rival, but if you decide to go through all the rooms, there are heaps of trainers and loads of items to pick up. If you're in a completionist mood and want to defeat all the SSN trainers and grab all the items before the ship leaves, then you'll want to take advantage of this room that offers healing, which saves you from going all the way back to the Pokemon Center every time. The main thing you do on the SSN is pick up the HM for cut, which you get because you rub the sick captain's back. Weird. The truck is one of the most enigmatic places in all of Kanto, and possibly in all of Pokemon. So after you give the sailor your SSN ticket, you go into another map where there's seemingly nothing more than a path between where you just came and the SSN. After the SSN leaves, you can never come back to this spot. However, the player can make it so the SSN never leaves port if they never get the cut HM from the cap. So if you trade with someone who gives you a Pokemon with cut, you can have a Pokemon with cut on your team without actually getting the HM, which allows you to access this map a few badges later when you have access to surf. And if you surf over here, you find the truck. Now, back in the day, rumor had it that if you use strength on this truck, you would be able to battle Mew, but this claim has been thoroughly debunked. The area is definitely strange, as it doesn't seem like the developers intended for the player to be here, but at the same time, it has all the trappings of an intended location, with proper roadblocks to keep you from going out of bounds. Apparently, in Gen 1, the truck was a graphic originally made for the beta, but why it's over here remains a mystery. Was it an oversight? Was it an Easter egg? As for Gen 1, we don't really know the answer. Its inclusion in Gen 3, however, is definitely definitely an Easter egg of sorts, because they did go out of their way to put a hidden lava cookie near the truck. It's not a super useful item, but it is a fun little bonus. The Diglett Cave serves as a way to connect Vermilion City with Pewter City and allows the player to go back to the pre-Mount Moon part of the game and gives them a quick way to get back without having to go all the way back through Mount Moon. Diglett Cave is home to 2 Pokemon, Diglett and Dugtrio. Make sure you have repels on hand because these Pokemon have an ability that doesn't allow you to run away, forcing you into battle. But even if you do use repels, that won't help you if you happen to run into the much higher level Dugtrio. If you happen to capture a Dugtrio at this point in the game, you can give yourself a pretty overleveled team member that would make Lieutenant Surge a cakewalk. This little section on the pewter side of Diglett's Cave is what I like to call the backtrack section, because it's a spot that lets you easily travel between locations that before took a lot of walking to get between. It allows you to skip Mount Moon and getting back to Vermilion. It allows you to skip Viridian Forest to get back to Viridian City. There's also an in-game trade in this area that allows you to trade an Abra for Mr. Mime, which is actually a really solid psychic type Pokemon to have at this point in the game. And the Professor Oak aid who gives you the TM for Flash is over here as well. So you'd better head over here at least once or you're going to have a rough time in Rock Tunnel. The path to Rock Tunnel does such a good job of communicating with so little that you're going on a hike. This helps set up the upcoming Rock Tunnel cave as a more intimidating cave than the much simpler Mount Moon. With all the ledges, the different color of the ground, and of course the hiker trainer battles, you really feel like you're on an adventure now. Another not in a city Pokemon Center is located next to Rock Tunnel. Unlike the Mount Moon Pokemon Center, there isn't really much interesting inside, but I do appreciate this Pokemon Center because it allows me to fly here later when I get Surf and want to go to the power plant. Rock Tunnel is the next big cave dungeon, which is best defined by it encouraging the use of Flash in order to get through it. You could technically get through Rock Tunnel without Flash, but man, it is not a fun time to do that, especially with all the random trainers that you can't see. Rock Tunnel also adds a little bit of Pokemon variety, with it being the place where you can capture Wild Onix, which by this point in the game is a Pokemon that is far outclassed by many others, and it allows you to catch Machop and get a solid fighting type Pokemon on your team. This little area right before Lavender Town can be one of the most frustrating areas in the entire game. Once you get through Rock Tunnel, you feel like you're pretty much done, and your Pokemon are probably tired from battling. But oh no, there's a few more trainers right here. Let me tell you, losing to one of these trainers can be one of the worst Pokemon experiences around because it makes you go back all the way before Rock Tunnel when you were so close to the end. The Name Raider is located in Lavender Town of all places. I always found this ghostly town to be an odd place for him. The Name Raider allows you to change the nicknames of your Pokemon. I never understood why they called him the Name Raider and had this whole dialogue where he's like, yes, that's a good Pokemon name. Like, he doesn't even actually rate the name. He says the same thing every time. Come on, man. You can be honest and tell me that Bob is a dumb name for a Charizard. I can take the constructive criticism. But I guess the reason for that is that it would have been odd if he was called the Name Changer. I don't know. I prefer in the modern games where you can just change the names whenever. Didn't really need a whole guy for it. On the next route, there's this grass patch that's located between 2 cut trees. Around this point in the game, I've usually stopped carrying around my cut user, so I often skip this spot. Inside, it's a pretty unremarkable grass patch. Like, you can get Vulpix or Growlithe depending on the version, but you can get them elsewhere, not locked behind cut. There's also a couple of berries here too. Underground Path 2, like Underground Path 1, has some respawning hidden items, but beyond that, it's just another underground path, meant to skip Saffron City before you're allowed to get there. The route between Saffron and Celadon City is so tiny and cozy. I always like to think of it like it's Celadon Park that exists between the 2 cities. This route being so small helps us transition into the next section of the game, which more so focuses on conflict in urban areas. I don't understand why the Celadon Hotel exists. If I had to guess, in Gen 1 they plan to do more with this place but just cut it for time and left the place in. All that's here is a clerk who tells you they're full up in this weird line of dialogue where the guy's upset his girlfriend brought her brother on vacation with them. I never liked when there were places like this that seemed like they would do something in the game because as a kid I would keep revisiting this place thinking something would be different. The main thing you do at the Celadon Diner is go visit this gambling addict who gives you the coin case so that you can go gambling yourself. It's a nice bit of world building, but since this is Gen 3, it doesn't have any sort of thing where your Pokemon can eat. There's this one house in Celadon City with an old man and 2 Team Rocket grunts. The old man brags to you about how much money the game corner makes. Weird flex to make to a stranger, dude. One really odd thing about this house is that even after you complete the game, and as far as the story goes, Team Rocket is completely disbanded, these Rocket grunts are still walking around in here. Guess they forgot to code them out. The Celadon department store represents an upgrade in item availability for the player. Beyond the standard wares, the department store offers TMs, in-battle stat raising items, EV boosting items, and even the leaf, fire, water, and thunderstones. But the most consequential spot for me is the rooftop vending machine where you can get fresh water, which is as good as a super potion for much cheaper than a super potion, with the caveat being that you have to buy each drink one at a time. There's also this little girl on the roof who trades you TMs for each of the 3 vending machine drinks. I'll tell you, in Gen 3, her TMs are quite a downgrade compared to Gen 1. Back in the original game, she gives you Ice Beam, Tri-Attack, and Rock Slide, which are all useful attacking moves. Tri-Attack not so much, but the other 2 are great. But in Gen 3, she gives you Light Screen, Reflect, and Safeguard. And while Light Screen and Reflect can be really useful in some specific strategies, Safeguard is a move that would have little utility in any of the game's battles. The Celadon condominiums are a big building that is mostly empty space, but has a few notable NPCs like the lady who gives you the T key item. It also has the game developer Easter egg, and this is also where you get a gift Eevee. But you have to get Eevee by going all the way up the stairs by going up the back way, which is really annoying because if you go up all the stairs on the wrong side, you end up on the roof, which is just a worthless part of the map. Not even a hidden item is up here. The Celadon Lake is home to the 2 strangest 1% encounters in the entire game: Coughing and Grimer. Coughing can be encountered at a 1% chance by surfing on the lake, while Grimer can be encountered at a 1% chance by fishing with the super rod. It's so odd that these poison types are encountered in the water like this. Obviously, the point of these encounters is to say that the water is polluted, but why have them be so rare? Doesn't that kind of defeat the point of the message? Like, well, I mean, if Grimer's only a 1% encounter, how polluted can the place be? Funnily enough, in Johto, the only Pokemon you can encounter here are Grimer and Muck, so I guess 3 years later, it got much more polluted. From a gameplay perspective, I don't really get why they would have these 2 Pokemon be so unlikely to encounter. If you have Surf, you already have access to Pokemon Mansion, where you'd have a much easier time encountering Coughing, with it having a 30% encounter rate in FireRed and a 5% encounter rate in LeafGreen. As for Grimer, I guess you could get a Grimer pre-surf by picking up the Super Rod and coming back to Celadon, but in the time it would take for you to actually fish up the Grimer, you'd be better off just getting Surf and going to the Pokemon Mansion instead. It's not exactly like there's any battles at that point that absolutely need a Muck for the optimal strategy. Oh yeah, there's also a guy who teaches Soft-Boiled by the lake, but it can only be learned by the Clefairy family, Chansey family, and the Togepi family. Oh yeah, and Mew too. It's a really small pool of Pokemon for a whole move tutor. Though, honestly, it's kind of busted on Clefable. The Game Corner. So if you've seen my What Happened to the Game Corner video, you would know how I feel about the whole thing where they can't use the Game Corner in games anymore. While I don't think that the Game Corner should have been removed based on age rating, slot machines are still a dreadfully boring part of this game, and there are so many good TMs and even Pokemon locked behind this pseudo gambling. Usually I just skip everything slot machine related and just wait till I have enough money to buy coins myself to get the prizes, but that can be a bit of a tall order with a lot of the higher end prizes. Under the Game Corner is the Team Rocket hideout, which really raises the stakes of the Team Rocket story. Before, you just kind of fought a couple of grunts here and there, but now you're really going after the organization. The hideout is home to a bunch of dropped items and the iconic arrow spinny puzzles. It's most notably the spot where you fight Giovanni for the first time. Once you defeat him, you get yourself the Silph Co, which opens up the Pokemon Tower for full exploration. Also, fun fact, behind Giovanni there is a hidden nest ball and net ball. These balls are pretty tricky to get a hold of otherwise, so use them wisely. If you remember to have a cut Pokemon on your team, which I usually don't, so I have to go all the way back to a Pokemon Center, you can come over here and cut down this tree to get to this secret house where this girl is all embarrassed and gives you the HM Fly as long as you don't dox her and tell anyone about her secret house. Okay? So many weird reasons to get important items in this game. So remember when I mentioned the tea item earlier when I talked about Celadon condominiums? This item lets you bribe the guards to Saffron City with some hot tea from your backpack. Yeah, I don't get it either. It's also weird that whichever guard you bribe says they're going to share it with the other guards. Like you're all just going to share one cup of tea. In Gen 1, you actually had to give them a drink from the vending machine, but because held items exist in Gen 3, someone could continuity break the game by getting one of the drinkable items traded to them. So they had to make the Saffron Gate opening done through a key item. When you first arrive to Saffron City, rocket grunts block most of the buildings, including the gym. But next to the gym is a sort of mini gym where there's a bunch of trainers trainers with fighting-type Pokemon. Once you defeat the main dojo master, you get a choice between Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee. An interesting and engaging way to get such a gift Pokemon. While in the original game, the choice would be final and you wouldn't be able to get the other one, with the introduction of Tyrogue, after you get the National Pokédex, you'll be able to breed in order to get the other Hitmon and Hitmontop for good measure. Mr. Psychic's house is a house where you talk to Mr. Psychic and he gives you the TM for Psychic. Yep, guess we needed a whole NPC for that. To be fair, the house having a sign on it does encourage you to go in and talk to him, whereas if the Psychic TM were somewhere on the ground, we might miss it, and Psychic is such an important move. Whoever you teach it to is probably going to be important to your final team. The Copycat is a character in Saffron City who, in a bit of clunky dialogue, I guess impersonates you. I don't know, I always thought this was weird because your character doesn't actually talk, so how would she... Whatever. The point of this character is to teach the attack Mimic. Since Mimic isn't a useful attack and is just kind of a gimmick move, I don't usually revisit this house. Pokemon Tower is one of the strangest places in the entire Pokemon franchise. While the series deals with ghosts quite a lot, back in Gen 1, they really hadn't nailed down the more kiddie vibe of Pokemon, just had a bunch of creepy stuff here. While it's toned down quite a bit in the remake, since the place was originally very creepy, you can't discount that there's still some residual creepiness left over. At the top of the Pokemon Tower, you fight a Marowak that you aren't able to capture due to the fact that it is the ghost of Cubone's mother, bringing an end to the storyline of the Cubone and its mother that were killed by Team Rocket. Cubone's lore is so messy because of this plot point. Like, there's so many questions. Does every Cubone wear the skull of its mother? Is it just that one Cubone? Why does the Marowak also wear a skull? Pokemon lore, am I right? Mr. Fuji politely teleports you to his house so you don't have to go all the way back down Pokemon Tower. His house has a bunch of Pokemon roaming about and even has the same little enclosure that we see in the daycare, communicating that Mr. Fuji is someone who takes good care of Pokemon. The main gameplay purpose of Mr. Fuji is to give you the Poké-Flute, which allows you to wake the Snorlaxes and move on to the next part of the game. It's around this point in the game where the player visits the rest stops pretty often. There are many rest stops throughout the Kanto region, and some of them have this little staircase that leads to an upstairs area that has binoculars that look out at different parts of the world. There's even one where you can see Articuno before you encounter it. Pretty cool. I always like these rest stops. They make the world feel like it was designed for this adventure, and for this moment, you're stopping with some of the other Pokemon trainers on the same journey. Just a nice little touch to make the world feel more lived in. And the player is encouraged to visit these areas because sometimes there are Professor Oak aid prizes and in-game trades located at these rest stops. Cycling Road is a Pokemon location that has appeared in a couple different regions, but something that sets the Kanto one apart is how all of the enemy trainers are these tough biker gang guys. I was always much more intimidated by this Cycling Road as opposed to the other ones with the regular cyclists. Another thing about this Cycling Road is that you can actually catch Pokemon in the grass. None of the Pokemon you can find here are anything you wouldn't really be able to find elsewhere though. As opposed to the other paths, Cycling Road is definitely the easier way to get to Fuchsia City. And if you don't want to fight too many trainers, this is the way to go. After you get off Cycling Road, there's this little grass patch here with 3 bird keepers. You'd have to go out of your way to go fight these bird keepers. I always found this spot to be kind of odd, but I suppose the point is to give the player a couple more battles for training if they need it. If you decide that you don't want to take Cycling Road to Fuchsia City, you could take what I like to call the scenic route. This is the longest stretch in the game between towns, whether you go from Lavender Town or Vermilion City. With all the water and this weird spot with this fence maze, there's just a whole lot of scenic adventure vibes with this area. I will say though that a lot of the trainers feel really samey on this route. There's not a huge variety of different Pokemon that you fight with all these NPCs, so fighting every trainer here just feels like a huge slog. Fuchsia City is home to the Move Deleter's house. While I definitely think that the Move Deleter is located way too far in the game and leads to players getting stuck with a bunch of HM moves they don't want, like Cut and Flash, if they happen to teach them to a Pokemon they otherwise would like to use. Funnily enough, this is actually a pretty early Move Deleter compared to other similar games. While you can get this Move Deleter around badge 5, that's nothing compared to Hoenn, which has it after badge 6, Sinnoh, which has it right before badge 6, and Johto, which doesn't have a Move Deleter until right before badge 8. But even though it's better, it's still too far. I get that you can't just delete HM moves willy-nilly because it could lead to getting soft locked, but one, did they really have to do that to Flash? You can't get soft locked if you lose Flash. And 2, they should have just had it like in a Pokemon Center or something, or in an earlier town. Throughout Fuchsia City, there were all of these little enclosures that show you some different Pokemon, and if you interact with the enclosure, you'll actually add the Pokemon to your seen list in the Pokedex. Something interesting about this spot is that it will either put a Kabuto or Omanite depending on which fossil you chose. Basically, whichever fossil you chose, the opposite fossil Pokemon gets put in the zoo. I suppose the point of that would be so that you still can put the fossil Pokemon in the scene in your Pokedex, even if you don't get it, but that doesn't solve the evolution not being seen either, so I've never really understood why they go out of their way to show you the opposite fossil Pokemon. The Safari Zone is meant to be a way to give the player access to a bunch of new Pokemon to capture at around the mid to late game. In most of my playthrough, the Safari Zone is usually where I would get the last Pokemon on my team, whether it be Rhydon, Exeggutor, or maybe even Dratini. The Safari Zone on its own is something that is worth a much larger discussion, which I already did in my Safari Zone video, a link in the description. There are 2 important things you have to get in the Safari Zone for game completion, which is the gold teeth, which you exchange for the strength HM, and the surf HM, which you get as a prize for being the first one to make it to the secret house. That's 2 HMs in this game that you get from finding a secret house. This house is home to the Safari Zone Warden, who lost his teeth in the Safari Zone. It's odd how 2 HMs are gotten so close together. Another notable thing about this house is that it's the only instance of a strength rock appearing in a house, since this is the house where you get strength, and it's a way of teaching you about how strength works. Once you get access to Surf, you can get the earliest possible legendary Pokemon encounter, Zapdos, who is located at the power plant. Another notable thing about the power plant is that it is the best place to get a hold of electric-type Pokemon, and it is also home to a few static encounter electrodes that are disguised as items. Silph Co is the final showdown with Team Rocket. This 11-floor office building labyrinth is quite a daunting task if you aren't looking at a map. If you know exactly where to go, you can quickly grab the card key and find the exact tile that takes you to the top, but the real way to experience Silph Co is to just get crazy lost in there hoping you find the right tile. Just below Pallet Town, there's a grass patch that I like to call the Pallet Town Garden, which is home to Tangela. Fun fact, in the original Gen 1 game, there's a bunch of different Pokemon here, with Tangela as a 10% encounter, while in FireRed and LeafGreen, Tangela is a 100% encounter. I wonder why that changed. The Pokemon Lab is home to a bunch of in-game trades, and is also the place where you can finally revive your fossils. I'll never understand why in FireRed and LeafGreen the fossil Pokemon are given to you at level 5, while in the originals they are level 30. Even level 30 is pretty low for this point in the game, but level 5 makes these Pokemon basically unusable unless you're willing to take part in quite a grind. The Pokemon Mansion is a spot where a lot of world building gets revealed to the player with the diaries that give some information about Mewtwo. A lot of the lore here contradicts other lore, so I don't really know what to make of all this. In the original Gen 1 games, this spot had lots of fire-type Pokemon, with it being the only place you can get Ponyta of all things. Definitely an odd spot for a fire horse to be located, so I think it's for the best that in the remake they moved it to the path to Mount Ember, which was much more appropriate. The Seafoam Islands are the spot where the player can pick up some ice-type Pokemon, most notably Articuno. The dungeon has 2 different entrances, but only the entrance from the Fuchsia City side can actually get you to the end. It's annoying if you don't know where you're going when you go to Seafoam Islands on the wrong side and you just get stuck. After defeating Blaine, the player gets an opportunity to go to one island with Bill, which gives Bill, I guess, a little more plot significance in the remake as opposed to the original. The first spot you go to on this island is this big Pokemon Center where we meet Celio, who has this big machine. This Pokemon Center even has its own Pokemon Center theme, making it feel more special. This machine later on in the postgame is the thing that allows the player to trade from the Kanto games to the Hoenn games. Treasure Beach is located south of the port of One Island, and it's this little beach with grass patches and a bunch of hidden items. Most of the ports on the islands have water around them that you aren't allowed to surf in because of the strong currents, but if you're vigilant and notice that One Island's port has no such currents, you'll be able to surf to the secret beach. If you decide to take the trip up One Island, you'll find yourself at these hot springs, which allow you to heal your Pokemon. I really like this spot, as it's a cool way to explain how your Pokemon got healed halfway through the journey to Mount Ember. Mount Ember is where you can catch Moltres in Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen, as opposed to the originals where Moltres is located in Victory Road. It's a pretty simple dungeon with a couple of trainer, strength puzzles, and this one indoor section that really sells the whole inside of a volcano aesthetic. Overall, the whole Mount Ember edition really helps add on to Kanto a whole extra dungeon with some extra love for Moltres, as opposed to just throwing it in Victory Road as an afterthought. The main quest on 1, 2, and 3 Island is to help this dude who runs the game corner find his lost daughter, whose name is Lostel.
Say that again?
After completing the quest, the game corner opens up where the player can engage with 2 minigames, Pokemon Jump and Dodrio Berry Kicking. But here's the kicker. You can only play these minigames if you happen to have the wireless adapter, which I never had. Yep, they literally coded these minigames to not work with a traditional link cable. That's messed up. The minigames themselves, if you were even able to play them, are pretty restrictive with which Pokemon you can use, with the Pokemon Jump only being available to Pokemon that are of a certain size, which isn't too restrictive but does stop you from using your fully evolved starter. And the Dodrio minigame literally requires you to have a Dodrio. Actually, it requires you and at least 2 other people to have a Dodrio, so 3 total. So let me get this straight. In order to play this one minigame, you need to get 3 people with 3 Game Boys and 3 specifically wireless adapters, not the regular link cable, and all 3 of those people have to go out of their way to capture Doduo and evolve it up into Dodrio, which, while that isn't too difficult, Dodrio isn't exactly the most popular Pokemon around, so most players would have to go out of their way to get one in order to play this minigame. And if you think it doesn't get worse, have I got news for you. So while 3 players is the minimum to actually play the game, if you somehow get 5 actual human beings who all possess Game Boys, wireless adapters, and the Pokemon Dodrio in their game, a tall order even in 2004, then you can finally get such berry prizes as the Spellon Berry. Yay! Spellon Berry. Yep, you can only get this berry if you got 5 people playing the game. Okay, I guess in all seriousness, the 5-player berries are like really good for contest stats, but then you'd have to trade it attached to a Pokemon to a Hoenn game to even do that. I don't understand the choices they make with these games sometimes, man. 2 Island doesn't have a Pokemart, but instead has this small shop where the shopkeeper addresses you by name for some reason. This shop doesn't have many items initially, but it does offer a chance to restock on fresh water without having to go through a bunch of vending machine text. After saving Lostel, you get access to Soda Pop too, but honestly, Soda Pop is less bang for your buck than the fresh water, especially at this point in the game where fresh waters are mostly good for using like 3 or 4 to heal outside of battle. Then after beating the champion, his store expands to having lemonade and Moo Moo Milk, an incredibly arbitrary addition. Why restrict buying lemonade and Moo Moo Milk from this guy until after the champion? We're already at the end game here. Is the 100 HP healing Moo Moo Milk really such an exclusive item that we need to wait for it? Then after unlocking trading with Hoenn, his wares expand to include the timer and repeat balls, which the timer ball in particular can be super helpful in capturing Mewtwo or Ho-Oh or Lugia. He also sells the lava cookie, which honestly is kind of disappointing because it weakens the importance of the lava cookie that you find by the Mew truck to have him sell it here. The Mushroom Maniac is the guy who has your Pokemon relearn moves. In most other games, this character requires a heart scale, but since Kanto doesn't have a way of getting heart scales, they decided to have him take mushrooms as payment. Either 2 tiny mushrooms or 1 big mushroom. You can farm these on wild paras, but it really is kind of a pain to need to gather all these items just for the sake of relearning a move, especially if there's a bunch of Pokemon on your team that require his services. Above 2 Island, man, there's a lot of entries for such a small island. There's this spot called Cape Brink that is just such a vibe with the waterfall and the one house overlooking the ocean. I gotta say, of all the places in this game, I probably want to live here the most. This house is the first time starter Pokemon can be taught the elemental hyper beams, Frenzy Plant, Blast Burn, and Hydro Cannon. While it's fun to have these attacks on your starter, they aren't really very good moves at all. On 3 Island, there's this little cave that's only about a tile long where this guy says he's looking for nuggets. After getting the National Pokedex, this expands into this little outside section where you get the real goal, Wild Dunsparce. When you first arrive on 3 Island, it is taken over by a biker gang, and you have to fight a bunch of bikers in a row to drive them out. Something interesting about this biker gang is that they're all just named Biker Goon, as opposed to the other bikers who have unique character names. It's strange, it's almost like these bikers are an evil team, like how Team Rocket are all Team Rocket Grunt. I guess the in-universe reason why you don't know their names is that you're fighting them because they're causing trouble, so they're not going to politely introduce themselves to you, while the other bikers are friendly battles, so they do share their names beforehand. I guess that would make sense, but some of the named bikers on Cycling Road are pretty hostile too, like the one guy who says, "Nice bike, hand it over." You're telling me this dude threatened me and then we exchange pleasantries? Why is he any less evil than the biker goons? Bond Bridge is a nice little scenic route. The Bond Bridge in question is actually quite small. The most notable thing about this place for me is that it is home to a trainer who has a Bulbasaur and 2 Ivysaurs on her team, and this bugged me to no end as a kid. I was like, How does she get 3 Bulbasaurs at this point in the game? Did she trade with 2 other people who also had Bulbasaurs? Why have your team be 3 of basically the same Pokemon? It's preposterous. The Berry Forest is a forest dungeon where you can find a bunch of hidden berries on the ground. At the end of the Berry Forest, we finally find Lostelle, so we can change her stupid name now. But once you find her, you still have to battle a scripted Hypno encounter. After getting all 8 badges, you go on the path to the Pokemon League, where you pass all the other badge checkpoints as you head up on to Victory Road. I wonder if there were ever any players who didn't realize how many badges there were in the game and went to each badge checkpoint right after each badge was obtained, rather than doing them all in a row. The badge checkpoints give you a strong sense of completion. Each stop and pass lets you remember and reflect on what you had to do to get each and every badge. You know, it's funny, in Kanto they were nice enough to put a Pokemon Center outside of Mount Moon and Rock Tunnel, but its Victory Road has no Pokemon Center in sight. It's weird. Most other games go out of their way to have an extra Pokemon Center in front of Victory Road, with that usually being the only non-town Pokemon Center in those games. But here, nope. And it's not like we're close to a Pokemon Center otherwise. If you want to fully heal, you are going for a hike. I suppose at this point in the game, you'll probably have enough healing items to be fine, but still, a Pokemon Center out front would have been appreciated. Kanto Victory Road is defined by a bunch of strength puzzles and a heap of decently tough trainers to get those last-minute level-ups before your final challenge. The Indigo Plateau is the location of the Pokemon League and the 5 final bosses of the main campaign. I really love the art direction of all the Elite Four rooms, as they do a great job at illustrating each trainer's vibe. I especially like that Lance's room has you do this extra walkthrough before getting into his arena, to set up that the final Elite Four member fight is just a little more tough. Of all the champion battles across the series, I really do love how the very first champion battle is against your rival. Pokémon FireRed wasn't my first Pokemon game. My first was Diamond, and when I first played through FireRed, I expected the champion to be some tough trainer, kinda similar to Cynthia. But going into that room and seeing the rival there was just awkward. And I think that's kind of what this is supposed to communicate. Even though the rival isn't the nicest dude throughout the game, he's still the guy you've seen the most, and now in this final battle, he's the one you're going up against. It really is such a fitting end. Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen have a really solid amount of post-game content once you get the National Pokedex. Getting the National Dex does require capturing 60 Pokemon, which most of the time you'll have to go at least a little out of your way to do, but once you do, you'll gain access to the other 4 Sevy Islands right after you clear the Mount Ember Cave. What I really like about this cave is how narrow it feels. It really gives this sense of journeying through this tiny volcano cave looking for a special jewel. Once you grab the ruby at the bottom and bring it back to Celia, you are given the quest to find the Sapphire, which is on one of the other islands. Get it? Ruby and Sapphire lets you trade with Ruby and Sapphire. 4 Island is likely the first destination you'll find yourself at after getting the Rainbow Pass. On this island, you'll get access to another daycare that allows you to leave 2 Pokemon instead of 1, introducing the breeding mechanic. A funny unintended consequence to this is that FireRed and LeafGreen are the only games that allow you to have 3 Pokemon in the daycare at once. Since you're already in the postgame by the time that happens, it's not super consequential gameplay-wise, but I always found that interesting. 4 Island is the home of Lorelei, and gives us a little bit more backstory to this Elite Four member who only appears in these games, as she seems to retire from the Elite Four by the time of the Johto games. Something we learn about Lorelei is that she's a big Pokédoll collector, which I think is a fun contrast that this highly skilled trainer has a soft spot for plushies. The Icefall Cave is where the player goes to challenge Team Rocket. It is also where you can catch Gen 2 Ice-type Pokemon like Swinub. In the final room, if you surf on the water, for some reason there is a 1% chance you can encounter a Lapras. Since Lapras is a gift Pokemon in the Silph Co, you don't need to sit and try to get this encounter. But I do find it interesting that you can capture one here. This encounter rate is not really too much meant to serve a gameplay purpose, but more so a world-building one, as the rare encounter is a reference to Lapras' status as an endangered Pokemon. Once you get to 5 Island, if you go up, you'll find yourself in the Water Labyrinth. Something interesting about the Sevy Islands is that they don't have any traditional routes. They instead have a little name for what would usually be just a regular route. Water Labyrinth is most notable for being the place where you get a Togepi egg. Resort Gorgeous is a spot where you can get a luxury ball, which, if you've seen my luxury ball video, actually used to be quite rare back in Gen 3. In order to get the fanciest Pokeball around, you have to go through a convoluted maze in the Lost Cave, find Lady Selfie, battle her, and then show her a certain Pokemon she requested, which could be any Pokemon you have registered as seen in your Pokedex. And maybe she'll give you one singular luxury ball that has the catch rate of a regular Pokeball, but it's just so Fancy. Memorial Pillar is home to a grave site for a trainer's onyx, which was named Tectonics. It's interesting that they made a whole new graphic just for this spot. The main thing that you get here is a metal coat, which is appropriate as it's the item that has you evolve onyx. You can also get a TM for a facade if you pay your respects and leave a lemonade, which was Tectonics' favorite drink. The Pattern Bush is a little forest dungeon area. If you look at the full map, the grass actually resembles the computer chip from inside the Game Boy, so that's pretty cool. This place is significant to me because it's where you can capture Heracross, who I usually have on my post-game team in these games. Speaking of Heracross, there is a house just outside Pattern Bush where an NPC examines the horn of a Heracross, and if your Heracross breaks a record, you'll be rewarded with a nest ball. Not a great prize, to be honest, but it's interesting that there's some hidden data in the game that says the size of your Heracross's horn so it could do this. I think that's how it works. How does this work data-wise? I couldn't really find much on it. The Altering Cave is located at the northernmost spot of Six Island, and man, this place is quite disappointing, considering they placed it at the end of your player's hike. Altering Cave was supposed to give the player access to a bunch of different Pokemon through the e-reader, but since the e-reader didn't really take off, most players will find this to be nothing more than a random cave full of Zubat. The dotted hole is where the player finds the Sapphire. This place feels at least a little bit connected to the Regis because of its use of Braille, though the Regis themselves are not present or referenced. Once you do some Braille puzzles and get to the bottom of the ruin, some scientist guy steals it from you and tells you he's going to sell it to Team Rocket. The Rocket hideout is home to what might be the most extreme arrow puzzle in all of Pokemon. Also, side note, I always found it odd that they made female Team Rocket grunts, but they were only in the postgame. Like, I get that in the original Gen 1 games, all the Team Rocket guys were men, but why not change just a few in the main game? I mean, you made the sprite, you know? After defeating the Rocket admins, who may or may not be Ariana and Archer from Johto, you fight the scientist guy. Kind of a strange final boss to this whole quest. Sea Vault Canyon is a mountainous path on Sevy Island, which most notably is the home of Larvitar. If you go into this one little cave, you can do a strength puzzle that unlocks unknown encounters. The Tanobi Chambers are where the player encounters unknown. Unlike most other unknown encounters, where just about all the unknowns have similar encounter rates, and you get the explanation and question mark unknowns after you get every letter, this one has some really strangely arbitrary low encounter rates for certain unknowns. Like, why is unknown B a 2% encounter rate? Was it really necessary to have you sit through so many encounters for some of these regular unknown letters? And the explanation point and question mark forms are only a 1% chance to find, which makes sense considering they're special forms, but it robs them of being a reward for getting all the other forms, and makes them even more annoying to get. Especially because, for a while, this was actually the only way you could get these forms of unknown, as they didn't appear in any other games until Diamond and Pearl. To make matters worse, the unknowns are all in different chambers across this little archipelago, so you have to look for the rare ones separately. That means that across all these chambers, there are separately 3 1% unknowns, 3 2% unknowns, and 1 6% unknown, all spread across 7 different chambers, making this the absolute most insane unknown quest in the entire franchise. The Trainer Tower is a battle frontier-ish area at the top of Sevy Island, where the player challenges a series of trainers where all of the enemy levels match the level of the strongest Pokemon on your team. There are 4 distinct challenges: single battle and double battles, self-explanatory, a challenge called Knockout Mode, where on each floor you fight 3 single Pokemon trainers in a row, and then there's Mixed Mode that has an assortment of everything. The prizes for completing each of these is a Gen 1 to Gen 2 evolutionary item. The Trainer Tower serves as a great final challenge for more competitive players. Cerulean Cave is the home of Mewtwo and the most intense dungeon of the game, being filled with high-leveled Pokemon. One change from the original Gen 1 games to the remakes is that for some reason you can no longer encounter Chansey in Cerulean Cave, while in the originals you can. I guess the developers felt this made Chansey too easy to get and wanted it to feel exclusive to the Safari Zone. Birth Island is an event-only area where you can get Deoxys. It turns out that in the re-releases on the Nintendo Switch, you actually can get the event tickets, so this will be the first time in decades people can legitimately visit this island. Fun fact, the only 3 Gen 3 Pokemon you can get within FireRed and LeafGreen are Wynaut and Azurill through breeding Gen 2 Pokemon and Deoxys. And this brings us to the final entry on this list, the Naval Rock, where you can encounter Ho-Oh and Lugia. I think it's pretty disappointing that this is an event-only area, because I think it would have been really appropriate to allow you to capture Ho-Oh and Lugia here, considering you can't trade from Gen 2 to Gen 3. Because they are event-only, I actually felt like Ho-Oh and Lugia were event Pokemon until Heart Gold and Soul Silver came out. They were just in that awkward middle ground where most games couldn't get them. They were locked off behind events and the ones where you could, and the only games you could get them without events being the extremely difficult method of getting Ho-Oh and Coliseum and the not too difficult but still needed a GameCube wire thingy way of getting Lugia and XD. It just made me feel like these two Pokemon were larger than life. I'm really glad that with the tickets being readily available in the Switch version, the definitive endpoint of the postgame is now fully realized. And there you have it, a close look at 101 special spots in the Kanto region. Which one is your favorite? Which one holds the most special memory to you? Thank you so much for watching. If you like what I do and want to see me do more of it, you should consider supporting my Patreon or becoming a channel member. Also, check out my other channel where I cover movies and TV shows.